never forgetting how to communicate. I think so, and not over complicating life. Life is simple.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Rael Bricker. And Rael, we're going to be talking about a couple of things I think will certainly be of interest. One is just in general, how do you create a startup culture within your business, and kind of what that associated with. And then the other one we're going to talk is a little bit about CRMs, customer relationship management. Definitely is becoming a bigger part of the business. Sometimes they can have some great uses, but other times it's much better to monitor daily progress, to have the team sit around the whiteboard and actually sit face to face and build those relationships. And then we'll talk a little bit more about building relationships in general, and how to get the relationships built quickly and leverage those relationships. So some great conversations. And without much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Rael.
Thank you very much, Devin. Great to be here.
So I gave kind of a bit of a quick run through as to a few of the topics we'll likely hit on today. But before we dive into that, maybe just introduce yourself a bit to the audience, a bit about your background and why you have some experience in these areas, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Devin. I'm based in Perth, Western Australia. Having been an ex-South African, lived in Australia for 22 years now. From a background perspective, I've done a lot. I embrace the idea that my late father said, which is, one day when you retire, have 40 years experience, not 1 year 40 times over. And so I started my working career underground on mine, 6,000 foot underground. Ended up in a small software house, started my own businesses in 1990. I reverse listed those in 1996, spent 5 or 6 years in venture capital, came to Australia, listed a VC fund on the Australian Stock Exchange, went back out on my own to be a solopreneur in 2001. I still own that business. It's a mortgage origination business, done over 3 billion Australian dollars in mortgages. And 7 years ago, after 2 cardiac stents, I decided to follow a real passion, which is being on stage and helping other businesses grow. And so I transitioned. I still own my financial services business, but I work a lot as a professional speaker, mentor, and facilitator for small and medium enterprise.
No, and that's definitely a great walkthrough and a great introduction. So I've done a lot and learned a lot, and excited to chat a little bit about some of the topics at hand. So with that, let's dive right in. So one of the topics that we talked a little bit before the podcast was with regards to generally creating a startup culture within your business, and that can be from the get-go. How do you keep that? Because a lot of times, maybe when it's just you or you and one other individual, a founder, by nature, a lot of times you are a startup culture because it's just you or you and a founder. But as your business starts to grow, it can get more difficult, at least from my perspective, of infusing that startup culture in the business as it continues to develop, as you bring other people on. So how do you kind of go about creating a startup culture within your business?
So I think, thank you very much, and ask a great question. The challenge is to actually do it somewhat intentionally, but somewhat organically. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but the idea being, if you focus too much on, we're going to do this to create a culture, I think it becomes too static. I think you have to have an idea of how you want it to be. And so in all my businesses, we've, again, started as solopreneurs, employed our first staff, employed the second staff, and grown the business thereon. But what we've done is we've kind of stuck to our core values. So in my research around the world on culture, and I do a lot of work in that culture space, I've interviewed 85 companies, large and small, some from 10 employees to some 90,000 employees. And the overriding principle, and it applies to small business startups as well, is that there were two factors that really made great cultures, and that was purpose and values. And I guess the purpose when you start your own business is your why. And Simon Sinek's famous about starting with why, and lots of writers have written about the why. If you're clear about why you're doing what you're doing, and you make that infectious, you bring the team along on that journey with you of what drives you to be successful, and I guess part of that is, every business needs customers, and customers give you feedback. Well, if that customer feedback is reflective of your why, your passion, that's what makes it effective on the rest of your team. So when you bring a staff member on, I'm a bit harsh. I employ staff, and I say to them, I'm actually a nice guy. I only fired 2 people in my life, thankfully. I turn around to staff and I say, I'm going to give you enough rope. And they go, for what? And I go, well, you either drown yourself, you're going to drown because you're not pulling yourself out the water, or you're going to hang yourself with that rope. But you've got your choice. Pull yourself out the water and come along on the journey with us, or you're not going to make it. But we're going to give you enough rope to do it. And so that, from my businesses over time, is empowering staff. So the working title of my book that I published in 2018, it became called Dive In, which is a different story for another time. But the actual working title for a long time was Give Up Control to Gain Control. And that's how I created a culture of startup, a startup culture, is I empowered my team. As soon as I got them on, I employed them because they had certain skills. You're not employing somebody who was, sweeping the street yesterday to come and write code for you today. Although at times there were lots of guys who could code were sweeping streets because they couldn't get jobs. But you're employing someone for a particular skill set. Let them use their skill set. Let them ask you questions. I also meet lots of startup founders who don't want to share their knowledge. And I think that would be, if you're happy to share your knowledge and train people with the knowledge that they might leave you, then you create this amazing culture of shared vision, of shared purpose, and of shared values.
And I think that definitely makes sense, and it's a great information. One thing that you hit on that thought was interesting that raised a question is you talked a little bit about, hey, we're going to create a culture. Some of it is you need to almost impart that culture, impart that excitement, and otherwise share, kind of your motivation and what you're doing and why you're doing it, and it to some degree becomes contagious, right? In other words, a lot of people will catch that fire and catch that idea. How do you go about doing that within I think in a general sense it makes sense, but the question would be how do you go about doing that within a business, such that you're saying, do you go around saying, hey, we're a startup, we want to change the world, kind of do that idea? Is it more of, hey, I guess I'm trying to think about in the practical implication when I'm meeting with my teams, when I'm talking, I certainly agree you should be sharing that, but how do you go about doing it, or what do you share? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, the as they say in French, the raison d'être, the reason for existence of any business should be to solve a problem. Okay. You're not going to get clients, and you're not going to do anything if you're not solving a problem. Now, my driver in life, personal driver, is solving problems. If I have to do the same thing day after day and I'm not solving a problem for somebody, I get really bored really quickly. So in any business, any entrepreneur who starts a business should be starting it because they're solving a problem. And so they need to find the people around them who want to solve the same problem. That's really, that's part of it, is that's how you're not going out and saying, selling it to them, but you're saying, I realize there's a problem and I want to solve it. Well, I'm going to go and find, not necessarily, and we're not talking about, finding more of the same, because we do need diversity. We do need the richness of diversity and inclusion in our businesses. But what we're looking for is find people who share the same passion for solving the same problems. And so and that's what it's about. It's about, over the years in the mortgage business, the financial services business, as we grew and customers. So the way I started, it was obviously I did everything, got my first staff, started handing over tasks to a point where now, 20 years later, I still see customers because I love seeing customers. I love solving their problems. But then my team take over all the admin. But the feedback that comes to me through the team is that, hey, wow, those customers really enjoyed the problem you've solved, really enjoyed the fact that you solved their problem. Tell me more about how you did that so I can do that for my customers. I think that's the best way I've created a culture here.
No, and I think that makes sense. And I think that too often, I think it is easy for, if you're the founder, co-founder, you're in the company early on, a lot of that, you talk by nature. In other words, if you're the person that's starting the business, you thought that through, or you've talked it with your founder. But as you grow and as you get bigger, oftentimes you start to focus more on the day-to-day, I wouldn't say the mundane, but the tasks you have to get accomplished. And it's easy to stop talking about why you started, what you're doing, what the purpose is, what the goals are, and that overarching big picture, because you're focused on the day-to-day. And yet that's a lot of times when you miss a lot of that culture is infusing it, because you stop talking about it and focus on the day-to-day. Now, go ahead.
That's just one comment on that. I agree with you. You have to keep reminding the team why you're doing it, and you have to keep reminding yourself. In my work with small and medium businesses, I do a lot of stuff around what happens when your why goes fuzzy. What happens when you're looking through those rose-tinted spectacles and nothing's in focus in front of you? How do you actually bring yourself back? How do you, and sometimes it's going back to basics. But the key, I think, to successful entrepreneurship and successful startups is that ability to be able to work in the business, because every guru says don't work in the business, work on the business. But the truth of it is, as your business grows, your team need to understand that you can do the job, but you choose to empower them to do it, as opposed to employing staff and telling them to do it. So if you have a mindset of empowering your team to do the job, then they come along with it on the journey. So whereas I meet entrepreneurs who go, I've employed this person and I don't feel like training them. I don't want to train them. And the main reason I get is, because they're going to leave me in 5 years and leave with my intellectual property. That's part of the world. But in those 5 years, they're going to give blood for the company. They're going to share that vision. They're going to go out there and so what if they leave? There's no such thing as slavery anymore. At least we don't think there is in most parts of the Western world.
No, I think that definitely. And I think that, there is a fear that people are going to leave your business. And I think that there's probably some reality. And if you look at most of their employees aren't going to stay with your business for the entirety of their career. And, and that's not a bad thing. You just need to build that in with understanding, hey, they're going to be here for a period of time. They're going to contribute. They're going to do it. And they're going to be part of the culture. And they're going to probably move on at some point, and new people will come in. So it's just part of the growth and evolution of the business. And so I think that's some great points. Now, shifting gears just a bit, because one of the other things that we chatted on before the podcast as well is a little bit about CRMs versus whiteboards. And I know you kind of talked about how you guys incorporate more whiteboards and daily progress, and how you sitting here on the whiteboard a lot of times is better than just looking at a CRM on a computer screen and looking at the numbers. So tell us a little bit about, kind of how you view the using a whiteboard and monitoring daily progress, and otherwise using it to build team.
So it's interesting with the evolution of that. I had a staff member early days, probably 15 years ago in the mortgage business, in the finance business. And she turned around to me one day. She had a pile of 40 files on her desk, and she was a good 5'8". And this pile of files, when she sat down, was taller than her. And she once jokingly said to me, if that pile of files falls over and hits the floor, I'm going to resign before it hits the floor, because I don't want to clean it up. And so I thought about it, and then I started questioning. I had 3 or 4 assistants working just on my clients at that point. And I started asking them, how they manage that pile of files on their desk. And they said to me, oh, well, some days if they're feeling really energetic, they'll work through the hard ones. And other days they'll just take the hard ones and put them in the bottom of the pile. Okay. And deal with the easy stuff on the top, which is kind of human nature.
Right.
So I thought about it and I said the average one of my team members had 40 clients that they were looking after at any one point. So I started thinking about a system where I could, and I said to them, what's the problem? They said, well, they walk in and all they see is this big pile and it's kind of demotivating to see that. I said, okay, so let's find another way. So the next thing I did was I bought bookshelves and I put, and there were 5 shelves. And I came in, and this is what I mean by entrepreneur being involved. I came in with a labeling machine and I labeled the shelves Monday to Friday. And I said to them, right, pick up the file. It's Devin Miller's file as an example, right? And today is Monday. And you look at the file, you call the lender, you do some work, you email Devin because you're waiting for paperwork or you're waiting for the bank. And then you expect to have an answer by Thursday. Physically take that file and put it on the Thursday shelf. So that now, and after a week, you've taken your 40 files and broken them down into 5 piles of 8. So when you walk in on Tuesday morning, you're only taking a small pile of things off your shelf, not a large pile. And then you go through the same process and redistribute them for the next week. And then I brought in the whiteboard. So I said, okay, now let's even have a better way that I can help you manage your systems. And so next to each staff member, I put up a small whiteboard, a meter wide, basically. And we got this permanent tape and we taped off 5 columns and called them Monday to Friday. And I said to them, right now, write down on Monday or on Thursday, if you've put Devin Miller's file on Thursday, write Miller under the Thursday column. And so that's how the process started. It was all black colors. And over time, it's evolved to other colors for coding. But so that's how it started. And then what would happen is in my daily huddle with the team, I would walk in and sit down with a team member and I'd say, hey, Rachel, all right, tell me about every one of the files or the files that you've got to deal with today. What are the challenges? What are the problems? What can I do to make your job easier? All right. And so that you'd say, well, yes, this Devin Miller character. Oh my God, his pay slips are so confusing. Can you help me work out what his annualized income is? All right. No problem. It's visually up there on the board. We sit down, we work through the file, we work through all the problems. And often we would bring the entire team around each person's desk. And I felt that was a good way of teaching the team members to collaborate. So there were 4 team members. We'd go from each desk to each desk, going through each person's files. Because I obviously started off, I was 100% in the business. As I started transitioning to do other things, I'd be in the office 3 days a week, and so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would do these daily huddles with the team. And so that whiteboard, and one of the banks offered us some Kaizen training. They were very into Kaizen systems in the bank and whatever. And one of the things in Kaizen is visual management, they call it. And so I got their Kaizen expert and he came in to see me and was telling me all about Kaizen. And I said, come, let's go for a walk. And we walked to the open plan area. And I said, well, those whiteboards next to everyone's desk, that's a visual planning system. And what had happened is over time it had evolved that there are 4 colors they use now for the 4 stages of a loan. So I could sit there as well with them or walk past and see 4 different colors and know from just the color that they've written Devin Miller's name in, what stage his loan is at. So very, very simple. And then I would say, okay, why has it been red for 2 weeks now? What's the holdup? So it became an incredibly simple management system. We run a CRM, we have to. We run a full CRM system that does everything and sends me emails every day. It's John's birthday tomorrow, send him a birthday message and all that stuff. And our CRM system links into the banks now. And that's how we lodge the deals. But the problem with the CRM as a general thing is it's individually based. So each of my staff gets their to-do list on their screen, which matches the board. But for me to go to them and say, just pull up on your screen your to-do list, let's work through it, I still use the whiteboard, even with our sophisticated CRM, as a way of allowing the team to communicate, and actually gives my manager, the manager that has been with me 15 years now, gives him a way of managing workflow, because he looks at someone's board from across the room and says, yeah, they've only got 25 files. Let's allocate them some more clients. Without having to go into the CRM, you can get the same information, but quickly and easily he can look at the board and go, yep, here's another file for you.
Now, one question, and I think that definitely makes sense as a great system. And I do think that, I'm probably a bit the same way, different thing, as far as manage it. But for me, sometimes it's just that, while you can put it up on a computer screen, there's a difference in writing it out, visually managing it, be able to erase it, change it, update it, do different colors, that is just sometimes, just harder, irreplaceable to capture on a computer. And while you need both, it seems like a lot of times people tend to gravitate towards, but I need my technology, and that's the best way to do it. Did you ever get any pushback or people who were saying, yeah, that sounds great, but I still want to use my CRM because, I like technology. And especially as you get younger generations that are more used to technology as opposed to whiteboards, was there any sort of pushback there?
No, because they came into an organization where that was just what was done. Okay. And there were questions over time of, yeah, look, I've got this fancy funnel showing up on my dashboard and it shows me all the work. That's great. And you're happy to manage that. But when I walk in and I want to sit down next to you and solve problems with you and help you and teach you and help you grow as a person in this business, then I want to look up at the board and go, because they're still dealing with, clients that are my clients that I've dealt with. And so I'll look up at the board and go, Devin Miller, tell me what's wrong there. Why is there a holdup? And so that for me, but it's become part of the culture. As a practical joke, one of the team members here is very OCD. He is very organized. His pens have to be in a particular order. And so the staff, as a joke, the one day found a whole lot of other red pens and replaced every one of his pens with a red pen just to confuse him. But that's part of the sort of fun culture that we have here. But he embraces that, but yet uses a computer, and we have to keep detailed notes on clients and things. All that's done on the computer system. But the management of the workflow is what it's about.
No, and I think that definitely makes sense. And so I think that there's a lot of wisdom. And I think you have to find, while the exact system that you talked about with the whiteboard and, what the, how that interacts with the CRM, it may change a bit, differently. But I do think you have to look and say, just rather than just rely on technology or rely on the whiteboard, is find the system that works best for your culture. If you're saying, hey, we need to be able to sit down, we need to be able to talk through things, we need to be able to see these visually, we need to not just rely on technology, and vice versa. You can't just run everything off an Excel spreadsheet and a whiteboard and never have anything else. Otherwise, you're going to always be overloaded and hard to track it. So I think that's finding that incorporation of the balance. And then, as you said, infuse that into the culture of, hey, this is the reasons why we're doing it. This is why it makes sense. This is why we set it up. And I've even found that a lot of times I'll start to charge down the path of, here's what we need to do, and go, tell the team, go build this. And I'll oftentimes jump over the why, because in my mind it makes perfect sense, and let's go build it. And yet then I usually have to take a step back and explain, hey, this is why we're doing it. This is how we're doing it. This is why it makes sense. And this is how it fits in with our culture and what we're doing. And then when you infuse that why, almost always it makes a much better product and a much better outcome than if I just tell them this is what they need to implement. So I think that
absolutely, it's taking them on the journey. It's taking them on the journey and saying, in fact, I'll go one step further. My staff hate it when I do that. I'll walk in to a morning huddle and I'll go, I was thinking overnight, and they'll go, here comes a problem.
No, and the way I always do it is I usually say I was out for a run because I love to run, or I like the benefits of running. I like to get out in the morning and run and exercise and whatnot. And I'll usually listen to podcasts or books on tape. And I'll usually start the same sentence with, I was out listening to a podcast or listening to a book on tape. And I had this thought, and they're like, oh, here's a new thing. And then I explain it. And sometimes I think, oh, we don't want to do that. Or, oh, that's a great idea. So no, I definitely have that same or kind of habit with the culture or with the staff here as well. So, well, as we wrap up, and there's a lot more things we could talk about, and I'm sure it'd be a great time, and maybe sometime we'll have to have that conversation in the future. But as far as for this episode, as we start to wrap up, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about how you generally infuse it in startup culture, how you bring people and help them understand, how you have those conversations, and then also how you can start to infuse the balance between technology and be able to sit down and communicate and brainstorm, and how you get everybody in a group and around together, and how all that goes in towards a great balance. A lot of things that we covered. And, if you're in the listening audience, there may be, more things that you could start on than you reasonably have the bandwidth to start on. So if people could just start on kind of one thing today, one takeaway that they could get implementing or starting on today to better their business, what would that one thing be?
I think it's learning, never forgetting how to communicate. I think so, and not over complicating life. Life is simple. You said, yes, we've got this fancy CRM system. You know what? I spend a lot of time with a big flip chart on my desk, just drawing things out. And sometimes I do it on the screen of my laptop, and other times I just feel the need to be creative and draw things. And a lot of that is looking at the systems. And so as much as I'm this out there, person who has the attention span of a goldfish most of the time, but if I close the door of my office and I say, I'm just closing the door for half an hour, I've got to think, and I go and look at a particular process in the organization, and then I go and I'll sit there and draw it, and I'll try and cross out blocks that make it simpler, because that to me is the key to business success, is keeping it simple. At the end of the day, you have a product. The product itself can be incredibly technical and complex. That's okay. But at the end of the day, you have to explain it to a customer in a way that the customer can understand it, and that the rest of your team can go on that journey. And so by keeping things simple, by having, I say when you employ new staff, if you can't explain your entire workflow on a single A4 piece of paper, it's too complicated.
No, I think that is definitely,
definitely it's just about focusing on the business as it grows and keeping it simple, not overcomplicating things. Yes, you'd have an operations manual for XYZ when you're at 20 staff. That's okay. But explain the operations manual in 4 lines. That's what you want to get to.
Couldn't agree more. So, well, awesome. Well, I think that's a great takeaway, and definitely think that it covered a lot of great areas of expertise. So now with that, as we wrapping up the podcast, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to read your book, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Okay, so Rael at railbricker.com, my direct email. I'm very active on social media, on LinkedIn. Mostly anyone can contact me. Just don't try and sell to me 30 seconds after you connect with me on LinkedIn. That's just one of my biggest bugbears. But LinkedIn or Rael at railbricker.com. And anyone who wants to get a copy of the book, there it is up on the screen now for those watching the video. And I'm assuming you'll put that out in the show notes, railbricker.com/free book. And they can download a copy of Dive In, the lessons I learned over 30 years as an entrepreneur.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to check out the book, connect up with you, and otherwise utilize or leverage a lot of your expertise. So thank you again, Rael, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. And now for all of you listeners, if enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could click subscribe, click share, and otherwise leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everybody can find out about all this great expertise to make sure that they can help or continue to grow their business and make it successful. Also, if you ever need help with your business, with patents, trademarks, or anything else, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Rael, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you very much, and look forward to being on the next leg of the journey.